Cold open. We grew up during peak sitcom, Seinfeld, Friends, The Fresh Prince. But those shows were diamonds in the rough. This podcast is not about those diamonds. It's about the rough. Some sitcoms were briefly popular in their time. Some were canceled almost immediately. You probably won't recognize most of these, and you'll ask, that was a show?
That was a show?
The podcast about failed or forgotten sitcoms from the 80s and 90s, starring
Brynn Byrne,
Aaron Yeger,
And Andrew Helmer as Barry.
a Radio Gizmo production.
Hey guys,
Hey,
what's happening?
well, you know, recording a podcast.
Oh, which one?
that was a show?
Oh, I've heard of that. Wow. What have you guys been doing with your quarantine time?
Well, I mean, I think we hit the quarantine bingo with completing a puzzle together, a jigsaw puzzle. So there's that. We ordered some non-alcoholic beer because we're sort of doing another dry month. And it was actually quite tasty.
This is not an ad, but I learned about this through a podcast ad.
It's called, what it's called?
It's called Athletic Brewing.
Brewing.
Athletic Brewing.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's non-alcoholic beer that tastes a lot more convincingly like real beer
Like
than most.
craft beer.
Yeah, like craft beer.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's
wow.
craft non-alcoholic beer.
Yeah.
Wow. Do you hear out there, guys? Like, if you wanted ads just as professionally done as this, it could be yours for the low price of.
Honestly, just send us a couple cases of this.
Just send us a case,
Yeah.
a case of stuff. You know, whatever.
we like beverages. So
We do.
just, you know,
If it's in liquid form, honestly.
yeah. We're all about it. Coffee, fizzy water, fake beer, real beer. We like it all. Like, we like it
Yeah.
all.
This was a good preamble.
Yeah.
Good preamble. So
We are now up to episode 22 of That Was a Show.
Wild.
And we are in March 2021.
We're a full sitcom season.
yeah, we are a standard network order.
Yeah. And to that end, we are nearing the end of the first season of our podcast. We're going to do around 24 total episodes, including our end of season very special episode. And to that end, we'd like to thank you all for listening, and we would love to hear from you. Send us an email to thatwasashow@aol.com. Why AOL? Because 90s email services still exist for some reason. Or leave us a voice message at anchor.fm/thatwasashow. We might play your message or read your email in a future episode. Tell us what you think of one of the shows we've reviewed or about a show you think we should review. No promises we will actually do it. But tell us.
I didn't even know that was a feature.
Yes, that is in fact a feature of Anchor on our home landing page for our podcast, as people can leave voice messages.
Listen to these smooth ad quality voices. Okay, so we're watching Pearl this week. Which one of you people brought us Pearl?
Well, I'm going to say it was sort of chosen by committee. What I did was I thought that this is going to kind of tie into why I chose the show. Our last episode, Get a Life, was primarily about one main character as a focal point. And it was clearly designed as a vehicle for that actor, which distinguishes it a bit from most of the shows we talk about, which are generally skewing toward ensemble casts. So I thought, what if we looked for something similar, but a female comedic performer, where clearly the show is a vehicle for that particular star? And I proposed a few options, which we discussed together. And after considering those options, we landed on Pearl because in addition to Rhea Perlman fitting that theme, this show has an absolutely all-star cast.
Yeah.
An irresistible to talk about all-star cast.
Yeah, it really does. It definitely, let's put it this way, it definitely does not fulfill only one person getting the spotlight of, like, say, Get a Life. Even though obviously going in, you would have thought that. But no, this is, it's very much a two-hander, if not an ensemble. Everybody gets to play a little, but it's definitely Rhea and Malcolm's show.
Yeah. And we'll, of course, get into more of how that dynamic actually plays out because we ended up watching 3 episodes, the pilot, episode 7, and episode 16. I'll tell you a little bit about the show.
Hit us.
Pearl aired on CBS from September 16th, 1996 until June 25th, 1997. It was created by Don Rio right after the John Larroquette Show. And much like that show, it was a vehicle for a big star. Technically several, but especially this time Rhea Perlman, who is widely known for her character on the long-running and very popular show Cheers. Pearl is a middle-aged loading dock manager. Her husband, who had been a longshoreman, passed away due to an accident. So now she's living as a single mother to a 20-year-old son, Joey, played by Dash Mihok, who lives with her. And he is, in turn, a single father to a baby daughter. They also live with Pearl's sister-in-law, Annie, played by Carol Kane. It's Pearl's lifelong dream to get a university education and writes an essay that gets her into nearby Swinton University. It is there that she meets Professor Stephen Pynchon, played by Malcolm McDowell, who teaches a required course that she must take in order to fulfill the requirements of her program. Pynchon is very openly full of himself and believes that higher education is for a cultured elite, not for the working class like Pearl. So there you go.
That was very good. How long did this thing last?
22 episodes, 1 season, and I believe I read that the last, 4 or 5 episodes got burned off real quick after it was canceled.
Well, hey, at least it aired. Was Dash Mihok, was he Benvolio?
He sure was.
Yes.
Yeah, he's one of those guys who was like a staple of 90s movies and television. Like the whole cast of the younger characters were it's basically a time capsule of the mid 90s. Like it's so awesome.
Yeah.
You've got Kevin Corrigan, you've got Nikki Cox, Sarah Rue is thrown in there for good measure. And of course, Lucy Liu. It's unbelievable. I'm like, how 90s television can you get? Like, it's just like the perfect casting.
There's not a weak member of the cast. They don't all get equal time to shine or anything, but like,
When we talked about the John Larroquette Show, you guys both schooled me on how common it is to name a show after its star. What's interesting in this one is they took Rhea Perlman's last name and made it the main character's first name. So I haven't seen that before.
And they tossed an A in there too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like there had to be a draft of this sitting that was called Pearl of Wisdom, right?
Yeah. Totally. Because, it is a very, very tropey show. So that had to have been on the list
she
of
also
titles.
Lives and works by the ocean.
Uh-huh. Oh, yeah. That was definitely the first draft script title.
Just, on the show, like, it's undeniably enjoyable to watch. Like, it's in no way, it's not winning any awards.
Yeah.
It's, it got 1 season for a reason.
Yeah.
But when it's on, Rhea Perlman is just a goddess. And I was just happy to have some Rhea Perlman for an hour.
Yeah. This goes down smooth.
It does. There is a lot to like. To me, it's obvious why it lost steam. Because it relied so much on silly tropes.
Mm-hmm.
And, although it's like a stellar cast, a lot of them are sort of underused, in my opinion.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I was thinking, I didn't know if it was just the episodes we watched.
Yeah.
Or if they're all like that. But
But overall, it is actually like a great premise. Like this working class mom finally gets to go back to work. And the parts of the show that I found especially poignant and wonderful, frankly, were the scenes between Annie and Pearl, because they're 2 women over 40 and they really support each other and they encourage each other and talk about, their dreams together, and that your dreams don't die when you reach a certain age, and that, you should keep going. Pearl's dream, of course, is to finally get her degree. And Annie has this dream, which is maybe not quite as attainable, but she basically wants to become a songwriter for artists like Dolly Parton. So yeah, but they often have these scenes together where they're talking about reaching these goals later in life. And yeah, I think that's great. Like, I think they have such a nice relationship. It's not competitive at all, you know, and then they have their, you know, the standard talk between women who are close when they're discussing things like the kind of weird romantic but not romantic tension between Pearl and Malcolm McDowell's character. So I don't know. I just think there's so many great scenes between the two of them, and I really appreciated seeing that in a sitcom, especially from the 90s. And you gotta love Carol Kane's character Annie. She's just adorable. Like, she's just like a...
Is there a more perfect sister pair than those two?
No,
like,
not
really?
at all.
Yeah.
Like, were they sisters or...
They were sisters.
Or were they sister-in-law? I think they were sister-in-laws.
They were in-laws? They were in-laws, but they were just
she's the sister of her late husband.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I thought that the relationship between the two of them is the part of the show that had the most promise. And I would have liked to see a lot more of that. My biggest criticism of the show is how much it relies on the dynamic between the main character, Pearl, and Malcolm McDowell's Professor Pynchon. I'll give a whole rant later about my deconstruction of his character, but putting aside the merits or lack thereof of his character specifically, I would have loved to see the show be more balanced between her relationships with her sister-in-law, her son, her fellow students, all of whom are played by great actors who brought a lot to it and could have brought so much more if those characters had been developed further and if they had more screen time.
Yeah.
Especially Lucy Liu, who unfortunately seems to be relegated to just a caricature who's obsessed with the professor. But you can see in that she as a performer is terrific. And you just want to see her expand beyond that one dimension. Like, just give her more material, please.
Lucy Liu, who is as Lucy Alexis Liu here, her first on-screen names. She just fires on all cylinders at all times. Like, any line delivery she has kills.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And yeah, you're right. Like, I think her character, like, she's obsessive about the professor, but there's like something unhinged about it that is like you just want to see more of.
Yeah.
Like you're pretty sure that this could go to some great weird places if they really let it.
Yeah. And then they cut it off right before it goes somewhere interesting.
Yeah.
Again, though, I think, and this is probably a common problem we might face on a lot of our shows, is that, again, we watched 3 episodes of 22. It's entirely possible the rest of the episodes were focusing on the other members of the casting. We were just missing them. But from the show that we watched in these 3 episodes, it sure does seem to be dominated by the Rhea Perlman, Malcolm McDowell dynamic.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, they do bounce off each other well, but the things that I want to see more of were, like I'd seen enough of that already after 3 episodes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought it was a fun premise of sort of showing Gen X college students and the kinds of fun characters that sort of symbolize that generation, kind of compared to a Rhea Perlman character, which is a very
salt of the earth
boomer who has a heart of gold. And like I liked that kind of that pairing. And I don't know, it's weird because I'm of 2 minds about her relationship with the other students. My first question was, well, why are they inviting her to raves and stuff? Like, why are they so quick to, but then I was like, but actually I like that because it's nice that they like accept her into the fold so readily. Like, it is very nice, but I'm like, is this realistic? Like, I remember when I was in doing undergrad, and there was, kind of mean ageism, I felt, amongst the younger students right out of high school.
Oh, yeah, it's a charming trait of the show, but it's not realistic.
It's not necessarily realistic. They're not necessarily gonna invite someone their mother's age out, like dancing with them.
Except the three of them are all outsider characters.
True. That's very true. That could be the bond.
And they all seem, I think the one thing is that they all seem to kind of fall under her spell pretty quickly.
Right.
Like they're pretty
how
much
could you not like her,
Yeah, I didn't read too much in it, but was Nikki Cox's character recast into Sarah Rue?
I have no idea. It's confusing. I looked this up too because I thought, they just basically replaced that character with a different character.
Yeah.
It seems like Nikki Cox's character had more more episodes than Sarah Rue's character. So I was like, okay, whatever. It's just
maybe it was just they traded off.
Yeah. But I think the Nikki Cox character was kind of weird because she was just basically what that actor played back then, which was the token hot like redhead. And, that's kind of who they had her play in this. And there wasn't really anywhere to go. Like it seemed like maybe she was a rich girl from the upper
I thought she had a lot of weird traits to her that I kind of enjoyed seeing. Like I liked the college girl who she's just constantly changing her clothes wherever she is. She does it like 3 or 4 times in the pilot.
Right.
And like I enjoyed that. And she also seems to be like really, really on the edge at all times. I feel like in the first scene they treat her as the token hot girl.
Yeah.
But like as it goes on, like she's just clearly exhausted at all times. Right. And like she's like the token, like just school's too much for her. Right off the bat.
See, I didn't pick up on any of that for some reason. Her character didn't jump out at me like the other ones did. So it's interesting.
I honestly found most of the characters to come across as archetypes that were presented kind of like the characters in The Big Lebowski, where it's almost like each of them is supposed to be a very specific cartoon archetype.
Yeah.
And maybe if the show had lasted longer, they would have grown outside of those shells. Yeah. But from what we get to see, it never felt like any of them were quite on that path yet to like, there's that layer that we're supposed to build on. Or like, it's kind of like each one drops into a scene, does their shtick in that particular tone, and then get yanked out so that the plot can swing right back to what's going to happen with her and the professor.
Yeah.
You want to talk about Malcolm McDowell as Professor Pynchon. And I think that's important because like it's impossible to talk about this show without talking about this character who's just dominates the show, really.
For sure.
Yeah.
Go for it.
So one little thing that I'll point out at the beginning, I think, Brynn, you were the first one to say this to me and ask this, like, what does he teach? Because he identifies the class in the pilot, like the title of the course is the humanities, which is really more of a department than a course. And it's never entirely completely clear what he teaches.
I think they mention what the course is called, but it's still unclear.
The course is called Humanities.
Well, it's clearly Intro to Humanities because they're all first-year students. So
yes, but
where he gets off on having this attitude teaching an intro course.
Yeah. He thinks he's like
not meaning to interrupt, but nobody would have asked you to quote Socrates on the first day of undergrad.
It's the 101 the 101 intro course in undergrad for students who presumably haven't even chose their major yet. Because he's going into philosophy, literature, history.
It's all over the place. It's like
this broad intro humanities course.
He is generic. Like, he's that mean teacher in every film or TV show dialed up to 11 with a fucking monologue that could suit whatever topic the episode was going to be about.
Yeah. And so to that end, I'm going to go into a little rant about the Pynchon character in the manner that I think he would use, which is an academic pontification, which I guess is also sort of in my wheelhouse. I think what bothers me about the Pynchon character is that he knows he's a pompous elitist and explicitly announces that and presents himself that way right off the top. The series begins when we are introduced to him with this lengthy speech that is very much just like building himself up as if he's like the most important professor at this school, probably the most important professor in the northeastern United States. Like, he's really full of himself. And I'm going to compare him to Frasier. Frasier simply is what he is, and his elitism unfolds organically over time. We learn about it through his actions and through his interactions with others and the way he reacts verbally to the world around him. That's something that, Barry, you've commented on in the past, is liking to see things get established in a sitcom in a more sort of naturally unfolding way, as opposed to like, let's just blurt out everything we need to know. Like, here's the Cole's notes of the character in the first scene. In this show, Pearl is presented as a fish out of water. Thus, Pynchon is the norm of this environment, an elitist in a power position within an elitist environment. In Frasier, Frasier is the fish out of water protagonist, and he's an elitist in a much more down-to-earth environment. Frasier, who began in Cheers as a fish out of water in a far more down-to-earth working-class environment, continued in his own show. But when they made him the protagonist of his own show, he was still the fish out of water. He's the elitist in a much more down-to-earth environment. So Frasier did a good job of making what is technically a similar type of character more nuanced and definitely more sympathetic somehow, and without question much funnier. I also use this comparison because Frasier started 3 years prior to this show and was approximately at its peak at this time on NBC. And apparently now there's a Frasier reboot that I just heard about in the works, which I'm not specifically endorsing, as I'm generally anti-reboot.
Yeah, these reboots have to stop.
I mean, I haven't watched any of the reboots, but I am also, for some reason, against them.
In conclusion, the Professor Pynchon character is a little bit too over the top and a little bit too one note in this manner of being this self-aware, arrogant elitist, to the point where it doesn't feel like those details come out organically as we could sort of fall in love with the character.
He literally states it.
He
states, people see me this way.
Yeah.
I mean, he might as well say out loud, I'm better than all of you.
When he says that, he repeats dialogue that people in another scene have already said about him, which it kind of annoyed me because I was just like, he wasn't in that scene. He doesn't know the exact adjectives that they used to describe him.
Maybe they meant that as a joke, but it just was
wasn't funny.
Yeah. Malcolm McDowell is a terrific actor. And I would have loved to see this character come across in, I don't know, in a way where, you can see through the course of the episodes that we watch that they try to build out these sympathetic layers to him or reveal more about his backstory or why he is the way he is. But by that point, his tone has kind of already blown that opportunity.
So my counterpoint to all that would just be, I agree with everything you said, except for Malcolm McDowell is taking up a very weird place in a sitcom that you honestly don't get that often. He is an antagonist. He is not the main character, and he's not meant to be likable, which puts him at a very weird position because they sure did their work, but it doesn't make for a very pleasant character to keep coming back to.
Yeah.
Because, in fact, I almost appreciated a little that, like, by the time we got to episode 16, I was like, oh, they haven't softened this character at all. But on the other hand, like, if they want this to keep going, like, it's going to get old constantly bouncing against a character. He's in no way supposed to be likable. And I found it really weird that outside of one or two scenes, they didn't make him likable.
Yeah. I agree with you that I appreciate the commitment to a bit.
Yeah.
And they clearly had designs for this character, but if they intended him to be unlikable, mission accomplished.
Yeah.
So here's a good example where I've seen this relationship work before, and that's on Community. Ken Jeong's character Chang, or Senor Chang, is their Spanish teacher throughout season 1. He is consistently the antagonist And they do that a few times here at the show. John Oliver becomes an antagonist. Betty White, even Malcolm McDowell at one point reprises basically a very similar character that is the students against the teacher. The reason why these characters work is that while we do get slight moments of humanization from them, for the most part, they're not involved in the main character's plots.
Yes.
They are always the obstacle, and they're allowed to be funny and pompous and all that. But when you get so many plots where the character is the main point, at some point your brain starts going, wait, am I supposed to like him?
Yeah.
Right? Whereas like Chang is completely unlikable throughout the majority of the show, which is fine because he's mostly the antagonist.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, to just circle back very briefly to Frasier, there's a distinction between antagonist and villain, obviously. And in Frasier's dad, Martin, who moves into his condo at the beginning of the series, is an antagonistic force in the show because his lifestyle and his day-to-day habits run so counter to Frasier's his need to control his environment in such a very specific way, and his elitism. And his dad, who's a retired cop, has a very different and much more gruff manner. And we know from right off the top that they don't get along, and he's an antagonist, but he's in no way a villain. In fact, he is, if anything, just as good of a person and just as charming of a person and likable of a person as Frasier. It's just they're different from each other. They're opposites. And so to Frasier, the protagonist, he's an antagonist, but to us, the audience, he's just an opposite.
Yeah.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
I think that they were going for he is her polar opposite, but he wasn't likable, and that is a problem. Like, I think that, you know, he was too mean in several instances where it was like hard to believe that they would have any sort of, you know, and then those rare moments of connection were kind of, I don't know, they seemed like out of nowhere. And, you know, they seed little things in that indicate he doesn't like himself very much. Yeah, and maybe that's why he's such an asshole. Because he literally says, you know, I have a quote written down here. Pearl says to him, well, you're really in love with yourself. And he goes, wow, yeah, too bad it's not reciprocated.
God, I loved that.
Yeah, that was a good line.
So he's got like a weird self-loathing thing. He's this like tortured intellect, and it's just, I don't know. Yeah. It's a weird thing that they kind of wrote clumsily. And the one thing I really appreciated about the pilot is that there's this kind of fun moment where she's making fun of him for the way that he handwrites his name on the board. She calls him out for not dotting his I properly, and she's like, see, you know, you're not so perfect. And then later in the end, she offers this kind of funny, kind of convoluted analysis of Moby Dick, comparing it to this old tuna commercial. And I found that to be not only charming, but relatable, because that is how I view the world as well. Like, it's like, how much do we relate to pop culture? And, you know, most of our view of the world is sort of through pop culture and things we've absorbed through watching television. So I loved that little speech. And he was kind of, at the end of it, he admitted that she was right. And so
he says that she's wrong, but it's better. That she didn't have the answer he had, but hers was better.
And then he very intentionally writes on the board and pauses and carefully dots his I. So it's meant to show, okay, he's learned things from Pearl.
It's a great moment that is ruined by the fact that they have dialogue saying, like, this is going to be an interesting learning experience.
Yeah. Exactly.
And then she's like, for the both of us.
Yeah. So it's very on the nose.
It is.
Like, I think this is the problem with the show, right? Is there are too many moments that are heavily tropey and on the nose. And, you know, it had so much potential, and it is so charming. It has such an incredible cast that I think it just needed like less clumsy writing and less cliche writing, I guess.
I'm so glad you mentioned that scene, because that was, of everything we watched in 3 episodes, the part that I liked the best. that Moby Dick back and forth.
Yeah.
And the way that he responded by admitting that her theory was better than his gave me hope that this could develop into a good show. And that was in the pilot. Had I not watched episodes 7 and 16, I might have thought, oh, this could build to something that I like. But knowing what happens with his character in those episodes, nope, no.
So in episode 7, which we watched, we won't go through the plot of all of them, but basically the main plot of episode 7 is Malcolm McDowell's Pynchon character has tickets to rent in New York, and New York is a couple hours away. He doesn't drive and he doesn't want to take the bus. So he asks Rhea Perlman's character to take him. She, at that point, assumes that he means to go with the show with her. Us in the audience know exactly that he didn't say go to the show with her. We know that the misunderstanding is going to be he's asking her to drive.
Yeah, he literally wants her to just be a chauffeur.
And there's a cute little scene of them in the car where they bond over Motown, and he is so insanely likable in that scene that it pissed me off.
Yeah.
Because I was just like, oh, cool. All right, we're gonna see, some layers of this guy come out, and then knowing
seconds later,
and then 9 episodes later, him still being a jackass. But I do like that the show is always firmly on Pearl's side, where it's almost always you're just like, well, how's she gonna get back at him now?
Yeah.
My favorite moment of that comes in episode 16, where it's the Danny DeVito episode. So Danny DeVito's there, he's the dean of the school. Dean Martin, great joke.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that too. There was a lot of riffs on that.
Cheesy, but I liked it.
And his first name is Aston. So it was like Aston Martin, Dean Martin. Yeah. There was all kinds of silly jokes.
They're leaning into it with that stuff.
And he takes her as a date to the dean's house because he needs a date. There's comical misunderstandings of how they become each other's date to the party. But he gets really mad and offended that she ends up hooking up with Danny DeVito, at the party. And he demands that, it's rude and wrong that, she was his date and blah, 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 blah. And I'm glad the show never suggests it's because he has feelings for her. He's just stuck up. And then in the end, it looks like she's coming to apologize to him. And I was so mad because I was like, she doesn't have anything to apologize.
I know. She did nothing wrong.
And then she very, very instantly turns it around. She says, I came, I feel really bad. I felt really bad about how things went. And then she goes, and then I thought about it and I didn't really care. And then,
perfect.
Yeah.
And then Danny DeVito shows up and he's just like, come on, let's go bowling or something.
Okay.
And then he's like,
yes,
and pays off the balls joke.
And then he's like, see you, Steven.
Yeah. No, he says Steve. He calls him Steve in a very pointed way because, a stuck-up guy like that would not be like being called Steve. He's Steven. He's firmly a Steven.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought up the bowling thing because I thought, we brought up bowling in a couple of our previous episodes.
Yes,
Aaron's excited.
Yeah.
As a trope that signifies the working class. And and so that is brought up very intentionally multiple times in this series. He basically, Stephen basically uses bowling to deride Pearl in one of the main episodes.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm sure you like bowling. And she's like, I love bowling.
Yeah, and then the fact that the dean is going to take her bowling is a perfect signifier that the dean, while in this position at the university, is not an elitist like this professor.
I loved such a great button.
Yeah. I really appreciated that because I felt a lot of this series was way too tropey and polarizing when it comes to, the working class versus intellectual elites. Like, I feel like that is something that doesn't need to always be presented. And it's really annoying and hollow because you can be both things. Clearly, you can be, there's plenty of very educated people out there who end up, working a blue collar job and vice versa. So it's kind of like, it's really, I find it really annoying.
And there are plenty of academics who in their personal lives are not pompous elitists.
Yeah. So
yeah, I think it's definitely patronizing to continuously be told it's okay. It's okay. Whereas like literally if you're, an intellectual working a blue collar job, you're like, I know.
Yeah.
I know it's okay. I don't need you to tell me, Hollywood.
Yeah. And the reasons people go get an education are so people do it for different reasons. It's not necessarily to get a job or whatever. It's sometimes just because it's a goal they want to achieve. And I think that this show shows it really well, but then it also bumps up against that in annoying ways. So I'm glad for that episode because I think it does kind of bust that stupid tropey polarization a little bit.
Yeah. I liked that episode a lot.
Yeah.
Primarily, it has one of my absolute favorite things that we don't really get to see all that often, and that, or at least lately, it's low energy Danny DeVito. Danny DeVito in actor mode.
Yeah.
I always love because he always has such this quiet charm to him.
Yeah.
That like I always love, and it's so funny to see this contrasted to the Danny DeVito we've gotten,
from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Always Sunny,
from naked birthing himself from a couch covered in sweat. Just the most silly, over the top.
And all of that is like, DeVito is like probably he's a quiet intellectual guy, but also you also know that a lot of his wackiest stuff in Always Sunny is something he's fully on board for.
Yeah.
DeVito is an interesting performer because he can go all in either of those two modes. You can see that he's equally comfortable in both of those styles. It's incredible.
One of my favorite random DeVito performances is just he has a couple of scenes in The Virgin Suicides, and he's just such a quiet performance. I just love him so much in it. And this, I was glad to see him. I was expecting wacky DeVito here, and don't get me wrong, he gets it, trope alert, into a food fight.
Yeah.
But he never goes big. He's always like underplaying every moment. Maybe in a thing of being like knowing, hey, this is my wife's show. I'm not the draw here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like they had to do a Danny DeVito guest star to keep the viewers interested. But it's true. He really let her and Malcolm McDowell be the stars.
Yeah.
I
love that you brought up the food fight trope because one of my notes, I put it in all caps, the food fight trope. The thing about the way sitcoms do food fights, and this show is absolutely no exception. In fact, this show takes this particular style to its absolute maximum, is the way that, like in a stage play, the characters just stand there and take it, patiently waiting for the laugh to land and then for the other character to smash the next piece of food in their face without even remotely trying to jump out of the way. It's like they stand there and this person smashes the pie in this person's face. And then they both stand there perfectly still and this person gracefully puts the egg in the pocket and smashes that. And neither of them are trying to move out of the way. Neither of them try to avoid getting more food dumped on their head.
Yeah.
They just stand there and take it in a back and forth like tennis match of a food fight, which is like perfect sitcom execution of this.
TV really prepared me to get a pie in my face at some point in my adult life. It was like you better be ready. You're gonna cause some offense and get into a food fight at some point.
I also thought it was interesting in that episode the way they did that creative twist of Danny DeVito knowing that in real life they're a couple. He played this dean who has a deceased wife who perfectly resembles Pearl, and he has a painting of her. And so there is this sort of direct, immediate connection there. And then they have like this love at first sight moment in the house there. So it was a fun, creative twist on that.
I enjoyed it, but it was very silly.
It was very silly.
And
Dean Martin is a very, like I said, quiet performance, silly character.
Yeah, and it didn't, to me, how the professor factored into it all seemed very wedged in. Like it didn't seem well.
It was jammed in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
The part of that episode that also reinforced my feeling that certain characters were underutilized is there's a little bit from her son who has a line where they're talking about whether he was a hairy child or a hairless child. And he has a line where he finds out that he didn't have hair until he was 4 or something like that. And he says this line where he thought he had the personality of a hairy child. I can't remember it exactly, but it got a laugh from me. It was like, It was a very clever little moment. And I saw that and I was like, I need to see more of this character and his relationship with Rhea Perlman. And we never, at least in the 3 episodes we watched, we never get it.
Yeah. I mean, it might be one of those shows that's worth diving into more just to see, do they go anywhere with these like young actors? Because they are all so fantastic and they all have little quirky one-liners.
Yeah, and we've encountered this in other shows before where one of our biggest criticisms ends up being like misappropriation of focal points, where there are elements that each on their own work, but it's kind of like, let's spend a lot less time with this professor. And the way you described it, it's like if we spent less time with him and he was like one of the teacher or staff characters on Community, then the tone of his character would be fine. And if we spent more time with the sister-in-law and the son, then we'd get great things, definitely get great things out of both of them.
This is a little detour, but, I sort of mentioned this already when talking about the stellar cast. But I also want to just talk about how many amazing 90s references there are and how this show is basically a 90s time capsule. They're going to see Rent, which was the biggest musical at the time. She talks about taping Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman, which was a hugely popular show at the time.
Which I always loved that show for. The title is always just a great punchline to a joke.
It is.
It totally is, because it was one of those weird, lame dramas at the time that everybody watched. And then there's like the young students are talking about going to a rave that's in this sketchy warehouse, and their fashion is like very hard 90s. Sarah Rue talks about wearing pants made of literal sacks, like potato sacks.
Yeah.
And it's just perfect. Like I was waiting for an O.J. Simpson trial reference at
I'm
some
sure
point.
in one of the episodes that we didn't watch, there must be one.
Episode 4 easily, right? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
One other pretty good button that I was going to mention when you pointed out the bowling button is episode 7 ends with Pynchon tries to make amends for having not brought her to Rent. And so he has 2 tickets to a music concert. I think it was was it the Four Tops?
Yeah.
He has 2 tickets to the Four Tops, which, as we've learned in the scene with the 2 of them in the car, they both enjoy that music. And
because I'm sorry, who doesn't like Motown music?
It's a great unifier.
Yeah.
You'd have to be dead inside to not like Motown. So he has 2 tickets, and it's very clear that he's suggesting they go together, and she snatches both tickets out of his hand and immediately pieces out. And although I predicted it and saw that beat coming, it's still, I enjoyed it. It was satisfying.
It was very satisfying. Every episode ends with basically Pearl just getting one final fuck you in.
Yeah.
And they're all satisfying.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of the show is her sticking it to him, and it's satisfying when she does it. And Rhea Perlman's great. I guess my last thought about Pynchon is we were comparing him to other shows. Another place where a character like his does work, where it's like the tortured intellectual, is in a drama where that character, like a Dr. House, has that aspect of being kind of antisocial and kind of full of themselves. And we find out that they're tortured, but we let it slide because he's saving lives. We let it slide because he is a fucking genius. And he is saving lives day in and day out. So we put up with the fact that he's a dickbag. And in a show like this guy's what? Like quizzing them on Moby Dick? Like that's not an excuse for being mean.
Yeah.
I will counter that because the version of this character that works is in a comedy. And it's Dr. Cox from Scrubs.
Oh, okay.
Who basically, I mean, House just ripped off that character.
Right.
Completely. But he is completely antagonistic. He's mean. He's very ugly to the character, but you accept it because he is a doctor and he is brilliant. And then, throughout the course of the show, you see bits of his soul come out.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what it is. He is an antagonist to the characters, and except he's definitely funnier. But
true.
Yes.
I'll just meet you halfway on that and say that is a great character to point out, because that takes it back to the comedy space. Dr. Cox is a great teacher in the sense that he brings out great potential in his students, which is not something that we necessarily get to see much of in this show. And he is, as you say, much funnier. And at the end of the day, it's a sitcom. Make me laugh, and the rest is just window dressing.
Yeah, so not to go down a real rabbit hole here, but I wanted to mention one instance where the sort of opposing characters actually works in a romantic context in a sitcom. It's Caroline in the City.
Really?
With with what's his name? The
Richard?
Richard. Yeah. Because eventually they get together, but he is a very moody and serious artist, and she is the bubbly, kind of optimistic, cartoonist. Yeah. And they butt heads constantly, and they don't seem like they would ever get along. But he softens a little bit, and as you go, they eventually get together. So I don't know. I think that was a way that was done well.
True. I assume there's some of that in The Nanny.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Between Fran and Mr. Sheffield.
We are definitely at some point covering Caroline in the City. I know
totally.
I know we've threatened it so many times.
It's on the docket.
It's coming, guys.
It's complicated because it is a successful sitcom, but we'll make a case for it being part of our meeting our requirements.
But fuck you, get your own podcast.
Okay.
Little point in the pilot. What was the deal with that very specific Jay Leno story?
Jay Leno story.
Carol Kane, the sister-in-law, has this lengthy piece of dialogue that is a very detailed Jay Leno joke, which, like, what was the deal with that? Like, he was struck by lightning 5 times, and
I like it because it ends with Carol Kane's pitch perfect delivery of having a having a natural fear of the sky.
Yeah, that was a good,
a very natural or very healthy fear of the sky.
Yeah.
And it's delivered in such a way that, like, just Carol Kane just made me laugh so hard. Yeah. It's weird. Yeah. I anytime there's an overt pop culture reference, I always like wonder how Aaron's going to react. Like there was a squeaky Frome joke.
Oh, I liked that.
What was that joke?
I specifically wrote down, Aaron's gonna hate that squeaky Frome joke.
I don't know what that. I don't know what you're saying.
You don't even know what we're talking about.
No.
He's not a true crime guy, Barry. He doesn't know.
What's a Frome? I don't know what.
Squeaky Frome was one of, I was about to say Marilyn Manson. Charles Manson's like top people.
That's like, going over my head.
Yeah, she was a very iconic scary person.
I mean,
I believe Dakota Fanning played her in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yeah.
For the record, I love pop culture reference jokes. What sometimes irks me is when it feels like the writers really wanted to wedge in a particular reference and they give it to the wrong character, and it's not a character who would ever make that comment. So as long as it comes through the right mouthpiece, I always like it.
For this show, I think it was all appropriate.
Yes. Yeah.
I didn't feel like it was too high-minded or too young for any of the characters. Like, I think they did that well. They they found a good balance.
I agree. None of the references rubbed me the wrong way in this show.
Clearly Pearl would like Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman. Like, that was like an obvious choice, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, to clarify, I never think Aaron doesn't like pop culture jokes. I'm always on the lookout for a character like for a character who shouldn't be making a pop culture joke.
Okay.
Or for a very reaching pop culture joke.
Yeah.
And the squeaky Frome one specifically stood out to me.
I don't know how I would have thought about it because I didn't even get it. So where do we stand for 6 degrees of Friends on Pearl?
Well, I went into this kind of assuming that there'd be some very solid connections to Friends, and there are. I mean, I found several 1 degree connections and 1 2-degree connection. So let's jump into it. Pearl is separated from the iconic sitcom Friends by, first of all, 2 degrees. Lucy Liu, who played Amy Lee in Pearl, had a reoccurring role in Joey.
Hey!
Joey, of course, is the spin-off of Friends that starred Matt LeBlanc as Joey Tribbiani. And Joey Tribbiani was one of the main characters on Friends. 2 degrees. The next one is one that you guys are going to be mad about because it's from Mad About You.
Yeah, it wasn't Rhea Perlman on it.
Yeah, so Rhea Perlman plays basically a reoccurring role on Mad About You. Mad About You also features Lisa Kudrow as Ursula Buffet, who is the twin sister of Phoebe Buffet.
Oh, no way.
Aaron's so upset.
On what show?
On Friends.
Oh, wow. What
Okay.
What else you got?
Yeah, so those are 2 2-degree connections. And okay, so basically the 1 degree connections are for all the directors. It shared several directors.
Yeah, I think
Friends.
I saw Burroughs was in there.
Yeah. So James Burroughs, who is a very prolific television director from that time, did like all of the top sitcoms, and he played himself basically on The Comeback as a favor to Lisa Kudrow. He plays the director of that sitcom. So there's James Burroughs, Terry Hughes, Robbie Benson, Peter Boners.
Yeah.
That's a name. And our girl Pamela Fryman. So there you go.
DeVito was on Friends, but he was just a guest star on this, so it doesn't really count, I guess, right?
And honestly, probably a few of the other minor characters also guested, but I looked at the main cast, and I was surprised that actually Rhea Perlman was never on Friends itself. Like, I was very surprised.
Wouldn't you have assumed she was like a family member of Joey?
And I thought for sure that Kevin Corrigan popped into Friends at least once, but no, it wasn't there in his credits. So, because Kevin Corrigan has been in everything. He's played the weird guy in like every single like sitcom and movie.
Kevin Corrigan is one of those guys that like, I remember him first from Grounded for Life with Donald Logue. And like, that show probably wasn't that good, but like I just remember like being like a young, like in my, early teen, whenever Grounded for Life was on, and just finding that actor hilarious. And anytime he shows up on something, including like Community, which I brought up earlier, like he just kills me.
He nails the either kind of dim-witted guy or the really edgy guy, or sometimes there's an overlap. He's either a dim-witted, edgy guy. So it's like perfect.
On Community, he plays Professor Professorson.
I'm glad you brought up Community, by the way, earlier in the episode, because I thought of Community as a point of comparison for another sitcom that takes place in that kind of school, but I don't know enough about the show to make those points. But I knew that you probably would.
Yeah.
How much? You haven't watched much Community?
I've watched a bunch, but not consistently enough.
Oh man,
and not recently.
It is literally one of the greatest sitcoms ever made.
Yeah, it's good. I did a rewatch. Well, I am not fully done the rewatch, but I started a rewatch.
And then you hit the gas leak season, it gets a little...
What of the spinoff?
I mean, the spinoff here, I could go on for days, really. I mean, everyone involved continued to kill it in film and television. Everyone went on to do bigger and better things. Rhea Perlman continued to act on television, playing lots of memorable guest stars and reoccurring characters. One significant role recently was on the Mindy Project. Project. She plays Annette Castellano, Danny Castellano's mother.
I don't think I got that far.
Yeah. Carol Kane is one of my favorite all-time television.
Kimmy Schmidt, her character in that show is terrific.
She's just the best. She's just, she's had a similar career to Rhea Perlman. She's kept on acting in film and television since Pearl. She sort of pops in and out of things in very memorable ways and is a scene stealer for sure. But recently she's gotten some more sort of co-starring roles, including, as Aaron mentioned, the unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. Such a great, amazing character, but she's definitely more of a jaded character. She always plays that quirky lady and everything, but then sometimes she's more optimistic and sunny, like we see in Pearl here. And then other times she has more of a rough edge, like in the unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt.
Oh, yeah.
Lucy Liu, everybody knows her trajectory. She's done so many television shows after Pearl. She kind of got a lot of notice for her work on Ally McBeal, which I think led to some of her major film roles in the late 90s and early 2000s, notably Charlie's Angels movies, Kill Bill Volume 1 and 2. She recently co-starred in 2 series that were pretty successful, Elementary and Why Women Kill. Kevin Corrigan and Dash Mihawk, as we mentioned, very, very successful, prolific character actors. I'm always delighted when I see either of them pop up in things. They're still working to this day, and they're staples. They're those guys that are, hey, it's that guy, And then obviously Malcolm McDowell, he was already a legend going into Pearl, and he continued to just keep on keeping on, and he's still working to this day.
Oh, Malcolm McDowell is fucking awesome.
He's an icon.
And less folks out there think, to watch this show, yes, his character is very unlikable. Malcolm McDowell absolutely kills it in everything he's given.
Yeah.
And this is no exception.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's a lot. That's good stuff. It's good stuff. I always wondered if there's a weird Cheers connection for Lucy Liu, because one of the first things I remember seeing her in was, if anybody remembers this 90s movie, Play It to the Bone with Antonio Banderas and Woody Harrelson.
While you're looking that up, I think this is set in Boston or the surrounding areas.
It was unclear.
Correct? It wasn't.
It was 4 hours away from Manhattan. New York. Is all I got.
It was 2 hours from New York, 4 hours round trip is what I took from it.
Oh,
the geography is confusing.
But we know that she lives in a port city and approximately 2 hours from New York. And then that other concert, the concert tickets are for Rhode Island. So Boston or something near Boston would make sense. But I'm mostly asking because obviously Cheers was set in Boston. So I wonder if that's why they kept Pearl there.
Yeah, maybe.
I think they just don't, networks don't know any other cities. It's just New York, LA, Boston, and Seattle.
Sometimes Chicago.
Sometimes
you're right.
Yeah.
Happy Endings was very memorably Chicago.
Yeah.
So to just talk a little bit about Lucy Liu a little more. Yeah, she was in basically every popular 90s show as a just guest star, small roles. The very first credit she ever got was on Beverly Hills 90210. And
now that's 90s. That's hard 90s.
Maximum 90s. She was on Coach for 2 episodes. Home Improvement.
Wow.
Home Improvement for 1 episode. The Hercules show with Kevin Sorbo as Hercules. ER for 3 episodes.
Weirdly enough, I remember that.
Yeah. And she was on Jerry Maguire, the movie, and just all kinds of random 90s gold.
So, Barry, you're a producer in the 1990s, and I'm a network executive. Pitch me Pearl.
Hey, Aaron!
Mr. Producer.
I got a favor to ask.
Oh, that's not usually what you say.
You see, my cousin Daniel, he's in a bit of a pickle.
A pickle?
Yeah, a real bread and butter.
Oh, okay. Well, what's the problem?
Well, you see, my cousin Daniel, his wife's out of work. You see, she's an actress, and she's been shopping this pilot along. I guess there's been a little bit of interest, but, you know.
An actress. Have I seen her in anything?
Yeah, maybe. She was in that movie Matilda. She was in Carpool. I think she was in some sitcom about a bar.
You mean Cheers? Are you talking about Rhea Perlman?
Yeah, you know her?
Well, yeah, she's a comedy icon. You really never saw Cheers?
I didn't get around to it.
It was on for 11 seasons.
It was.
Well, what's the show?
Well, you see, it's called Pearl. It's about Rhea Perlman going back to school.
Going back to school?
Yeah.
Yeah, CBS already bought this.
Oh.
Wait, is your cousin Danny DeVito?
Yeah, you know that deadbeat? This was fun. We've had a lot of laughs, but some things are no laughing matter. What did we learn from Pearl?
We learned that if you're going to make one of your main characters deliberately unlikable, be prepared for the fact that people are not going to want to watch an unlikable character for very long.
Boom. Podcasted.
Tossed salads and scrambled eggs.
Quite stylish.
We're calling again. And cut to credits. That Was a Show is created and hosted by Brynn Byrne, Andrew Barry Helmer, and myself, Aaron Yeger. It's a production of Radio Gizmo in Toronto, Canada. Subscribe, rate, review, and share. Follow us on Instagram and tell your friends about it. That Was a Show?
Radio Gizmo.